I'm Lena, the face of our Authors Corner series. This month, we're lucky enough to feature not one, but two DC area authors, Suzanne Feldman and Anthony Moll, winners of the Washington Writers Publishing House 22 manuscript contest in fiction and poetry, respectively. So Suzanne Feldman is the author of the collection The Witch Bottle, and Anthony is the author of You Cannot Save Here, a wonderful poetry collection. So today we're going to be doing things a little bit differently. I'm thrilled to introduce Caroline Bach, president and editor at the Washington Writers Publishing House, who will lead the conversation. But for more Suzanne and Anthony and for more Authors Corner, you can check out our website to find articles, interviews, podcast episodes, and most importantly, a link to purchase the books. So welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much, Lena. And thank you everybody at the Inner Loop. They have been wonderful friends of our small literary press, the Washington Writers Publishing House. And I was thrilled that they were open to featuring both of our authors who won our big manuscript awards in 2022. And I'm going to dive into a few questions, hopefully questions that will enable you to get to know them better and me to know them better, because we just met. We judge our manuscripts blind. We work on them as a team at the Washington Writers Publishing House. We hope to pay it forward every year to new writers, which means right now we have our 2023 manuscript contest open. And we're doing something a little new in 2023. We're doing asking for book-length manuscripts of poetry, of fiction, and also for the first time, creative nonfiction. So if there are writers out there, and I hope there are, from DC, Maryland, and Virginia, I hope you consider sending us your book-length manuscripts and trusting us in the way that Suzanne and Anthony did with their work. So without further ado, just to dive into a little bit about who they are, and I'm not going to do a whole formal bio. I'm going to say Anthony is a veteran. Not only is he a professor, not only is he a poet and an essayist and a memoirist, but he's an Army veteran. And Suzanne is not only the author of 5 novels ranging from sci-fi to historical fiction, which I love, but she is a retired public school teacher, an art teacher. And I think that informs their writing in really unique ways. And I'd love to hear how that comes into their writing. And then there's other parts of their identities that we'll talk about toward the end, little teaser. But Anthony.
Yeah, so you know, to be honest, I'd say that the Army wasn't a first act. It was a prelude. Like, I never wanted to be a professional soldier. I didn't join the Army so I could soldier. I joined the Army to, like a lot of people across America, to escape poverty, so that I could live the sort of life in which I could become a writer. So I could go to college and have something to write about and all that. So I've been writing since I was a kid. It was like the first job that I imagined wanting to do. I've been pursuing it for a long time. I just had to go through that route to get to writer. So yeah, not really first act. And also I think like we also don't want to perpetuate the act that like most writers are writers by trade. Like most writers have day jobs and write. I think this is true of most writers I know. There's only a select few who are making sort of money where it's just writing that's sustaining them, and not like writing and teaching writing, or writing and an unrelated day job. So I think, you know, I'm in my late 30s, but I think I'm very much still in my first act.
And Suzanne, are you still in your first act?
Oh, I don't even know what act I'm in. Like Anthony, I have been writing for a really long time, since I was a tiny child. And even before I knew how to write, I was telling stories, and that's a long story that I won't bother you with. But when I started teaching, I knew that I wanted to write. I also knew that I didn't want to teach creative writing because, as Anthony knows, you have to read all kinds of terrible things that people give to you to grade, and it's just discouraging. So since I as some of my friends have said, disgustingly talented. I have a degree in fine arts, and that's what I used to get a job teaching art for almost 30 years. And the reason that I taught art was so I could go home and write, because I didn't have to bring work home to grade. And so it's been a long strategy, long-term strategy to get where I am right now, which is retired. And all I do is write and do stuff that has to do with writing. It's awesome. So it's a long game. I don't know if it's a prelude or even an act. I think it's the whole play.
Oh, I love that description. It's a long game. You know what I haven't done yet? Shown your books.
Oh,
This is Anthony's Moll's You Cannot Save Here. And here is the beautiful Witch Bottle and Other Stories, both available from the Washington Writers Publishing House. So it sounds like that each of you have put real time and effort into not only writing, but developing the craft of writing and thinking about writing. And I'd love to hear more about your writing process. Anthony.
sure. I'll kick it off. So I'm really lucky that in my home, my partner is a brilliant reader. And so I have a first reader. That person reads drafts before anyone else does. And then I'll do some feedback between that and when I submit it to my writing group. So we have a really amazing writing group. We call ourselves the Healthies because we're all in poor health. It's sort of a joke. They're incredible. They're all people who came out of my program, my MFA program, though not at the same time. Like a lot of different years represented. Some who like never finished, some who finished before or after me. But it's a really amazing group of writers who gather once a month to offer feedback. It's a feedback workshop. And so I have a first reader, feedback. I have my workshop group. And then, you know, it's often another round or two of feedback after that before it ever starts going out. And hopefully it goes out and finds a home. And if it doesn't go out, if it goes out and it doesn't find a home, it's often I'll do another draft or two. I'll keep tinkering with it until it's published. And sometimes even after it's published, I keep tinkering.
Unlike, that's wonderful. I mean, it sounds very much like my own process. As both of you know, I'm also a writer as well as being the editor here at the Washington Writers Publishing House. And I'm also a teacher. And to Suzanne's point about how hard it is to teach creative writing, one of the most challenging things is to keep saying to myself, to my students, that writing is revising over and over until you want to just die. Okay, but Suzanne, this is not about me. This is about your writing process. So share with us a little insight. How do you motivate yourself every day at this point to, after 5 and 6 books, to keep writing?
Well, you know, it's an addictive thing. And once you get something published, you're like, oh my God, I bet I could do that again. What a rush. My process is when I was teaching, I would come home, I would drink a lot of coffee and, you know, just get started. And now I write between 10 and 2. I treat it like a job. It's great. I close my door and not even the dog bothers me. I'm very lucky to have such understanding, you know, people and creatures in my house. I just, you know, like Anthony said, you know, it's, you know, you write and you revise and you write and you revise and you write and you revise. There's really no way to avoid that. Although, you know, when you are writing, you're like, my God, my words are golden. And I'm never going to change this. This is so good. But it's, you know, you come to, when you read it later, you're like, oh, yeah, it needs to be fixed.
Suzanne, just staying with your words, because one thing I was struck with in this wonderful book, The Witch Bottle and Other Stories, one thing I was struck with is that you write long. In an age when a lot of people are writing flash, they're writing, microfiction, you wrote 6 stories, 2 that are essentially novellas. Do you always lean into the long?
I actually cannot shut up, and that is why those stories are so long. There are so few places that take works that are 8,000 words or longer. I mean, it's a tough thing to find a place that'll do that, but I have managed. I like the arc of the story. I like really just following it to its end. The last story, Goat Island, was a novella that took me almost 10 years to get right. And I finally gave it to my writing group, and they were like, "Oh, it's so obvious. How come you haven't seen this?" And then it went out to you guys, and it got published. So it was, you just have to take your time. It is a very long game, and it's a long story.
That is such good advice. I mean, again, you're talking to a writer who's a very impatient writer. So I've been writing a lot of flash just to finish. And I have to remember that it's a long game. And there's also something I found very unique, sort of pivoting now back to Anthony, is I remember when I was first talking about your collection with Jonah Colson, who is our poetry editor. This is Anthony's wonderful book. And he said, you're going to find something strange about this, Caroline. I was like, it's poetry. I don't read that much poetry anymore. He goes, most of the titles of the poems are the same. Are you going to be okay with that? I go, it's not that I'm going to be okay with that. I want to know why the writer did it, because it just sounds so cool. So Anthony, titles.
Yeah. Isn't it lovely though to like open the table of contents and have like more than half of it be the same thing over and over again? It's really like visually, typographically gorgeous to me. It's I think in part doing this asks the readers to think about like the nature of repetition and what hearing a repeated message, any repeated message, does to us. And so maybe we reflect on that message and how it's different in context each time it's repeated. And I hope it does that a little bit in the book. But also like part of the work is about like climate disaster or disaster in general. And so I think also about how, hearing something repeated over and over again, by like the 30th time you've read it, and there are like 30 poems in this collection titled it, you can just ignore it. You skim over the title. You don't even consider the title. You're like, oh, another one of these, and then you jump straight into the poem. And that too reflects sort of the way we think about disaster and being constantly barraged with messages of disaster. The first time we hear it, we panic. And then at some point, we're like, oh yeah, this again. Okay, got it, thumbs up.
Right. I mean, I really felt reading it through preparation for this, the power of repetition. And I was, I saw the beauty in it. I really, and so thank you. Thank you for making me think about the title in a way that I hadn't really. I think that's one big reason to people to read this collection, because of the way he addresses the same sense of not only disaster always, but sort of impending disaster. It's like it's just about to happen. And then you pull back. We're not quite at Armageddon, but you save us at the end. I found it really, really lovely. But I found both of your writings so lovely. I mean, I think as a small press, to be able to draw, such talent. The DMV community in general has shown a lot of talent, but I'm so glad that both of you have found the Washington Writers Publishing House a home with us. And we're going to make you work for it, because we pay it forward. So Anthony and Suzanne will be key judges for next year's manuscript contests in fiction and poetry. So in saying that, I think we should get a sense of their writing. So I asked them each if they would read just a short teaser for the author's corner. Suzanne, if you want to go first in this case, and then
Sure.
Anthony, and I will be quiet and listen.
Okay, so this is the title story from The Witch Bottle and Other Stories. And it's called The Witch Bottle. You know it's irrational, but you believe the nosy woman who lives next door is a witch. Not the kind of witch who casts spells, but a poisoner. You know that there is such a thing because you found it on the internet. You found an antidote too. To avoid being poisoned by witches, take a blue bottle, fill it with your own fingernail clippings and hair, 6 metal nails, and a little urine. Cork it and bury it upside down in the ground. That's what it says on the internet. You'll be safe from the most intimate sources of poison. The question of why she wants to poison you is a good one. Maybe you scared her cat when you pulled into the driveway. Maybe she was using those binoculars she keeps on the back porch, which she says are for watching birds, but didn't like what she saw when she was peeping through your blinds from her own house. Maybe she didn't like the way you make love to your wife. Not that it's any of her business, not in any way at all. Even if your wife isn't all that pleased with your sexual technique and puts up with it, and maybe said something to her girlfriends, which may have somehow gotten back to the witch next door. Maybe the witch thinks she's doing your wife a favor by getting you out of the way. And I'll stop there.
I love it. I love it. Because we keep reading together, I keep hearing you read that piece over and over again. And I don't think I told you this, but you've never read it all the way through when we've been together. And so after the first time, I immediately, as soon as I could get my hands on the book, I was like, I have to finish this story as soon as we can. I'm going to read just a poem. It is also a title poem, like 29 others in the book, from You Cannot Save Here. And it's about that people trying to get back to normal during times of disaster, like a global pandemic, when the world is very much not normal. You cannot save here. The seams burst and we still have to go to work. The waters rise and someone still asks you to put on a boot or tie, a smile, black slacks and or sneaks. Sell your hours while the West turns to ash, while the world covers a hacking cough. Gozer takes a downtown tower and cops refuse to shut down traffic along Pratt Street during rush hour. A rider appears on a dark horse on the Beltway's westbound lane, and 1,000 locusts swarm around each hoof as it hits the asphalt. The skies turn gray. The radio hums an annual fundraising drive. Your boss sucks his teeth on the other end of a call. Unprecedented times, yes, yes. New normal, yes, yes. I hope this finds you well. Fenrir stretches upward on his hind legs to swallow the sun. Just take care to find someone who can cover your shift.
Wow. Wow, both of you. Wow. 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 I think we have time for a few more questions, if that's all right with everybody. Anthony, one thing you do in your poems is mix sort of the high and the low. As I was reading through the collection again, in one poem you were talking about Denny's and the B-side of a Bee Gees album. And the next poem, you're referencing Mary Oliver and John Berger. And I'm wondering how you do that, why you do it. And it works wonderfully as a whole.
Oh, glad. I'm so glad you think so. So I think that writers should be honest about the world around us. And, a lot of people, they tie their self-worth to their status, and they tie some of that status to the media that they consume, or at least the media they say they consume. But most of us, artists in particular, we like a lot of stuff. And so I like theater and opera and art museums and John Berger and mythologies, but I also like Game of Thrones and Carly Rae Jepsen and pro wrestling and The Last of Us. And so I'm just being honest. I'm just doing my best to be honest that my life and my art is influenced by all of that. And I don't think I'm the only one to do it. Like it feels novel sometimes, but I think a lot of poets, both contemporary and historical, do it. You know, I think in part, like Eliot, for all his elitism, is doing it, and Whitman's doing it, and John Donne's doing it, and in the 20th century, Tom Gunn is doing it. So I think it's really common. It just feels weird when it's stuff like Amy Mann or something like that.
Well, and you're doing it, Anthony. So we're going to have that on the list. Pivoting to our other writer, our fiction writer, is how Suzanne portrays women artists. And particularly in the first story, Untitled. You really look at the women artists. Now you studied art in Baltimore.
Yes.
And I'm wondering not only like, what more are you trying to say about women artists? We know there's been struggles. And what more are you saying about the 70s, just from a writerly point of view and, you know, and the actual story?
So the 70s, and not all of us were there, but some of us were, was a pretty, you know, fundamental time for me. I was in college. I just was going from high school to college. There was all sorts of political stuff. The Vietnam War was more or less ending. And it was just so full of turmoil. You know, feminism had, you know, gotten its feet on the ground. In the early 80s, the Guerrilla Girls, if you're familiar with them, you know, were, you know, basically attacking museums for not having any women artists in them. And, you know, that was really that wasn't that long ago. And it's still an issue. There is still, you know, just a fraction of women artists in museums. There are a fraction of women artists in galleries. And the weird thing is that most of the students in art school are women. So it's sort of this bizarre combination of circumstances that are utterly unfair. Let's see, and one of the things that I really find helpful about looking at women artists' work is like the unspoken stuff that's there inside the painting that you can find if you look deeply enough and you can write about. And one of my favorite artists is Remedios Vero, who is an artist from Mexico of Spanish and German extraction. She's a surrealist who worked in the early part of the 20th century, in the 20s and 30s. And her work, I mean, I really wanted to put a little Cher, you know, picture in here, but her work is amazing. It's so unspoken and so evocative and so strange. And I just, you know, she's just an amazing artist. She's one of my favorites.
You know, I love how both of you take, you know, sort of cultural icons and cultural moments and make it now. And that you do it within the other part of your identities, which is as queer artists. And it was just a coincidence that this year we have two fabulous writers who often also happen to be LGBTQ. I have to make sure I say that right, as my own daughter is part of that community. And I'm wondering how you bring that into your writing. And Anthony, would you like to share first? And I have tried very hard to be correct on pronouns, and I probably screwed up once or twice. That's the other thing my daughter's trying to teach me.
That's very nice of your
Use
daughter.
they, them.
Yeah.
So if I screwed up during the interview once, I apologize. But you know, give us some insights, because you write, it's there woven in. You almost surprise us in a way in some of the poems with that part of your identity.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, you know, in one of the questions you had sent me over the course of this sort of promotion thing, you mentioned asking for prep, which is a poem that's gotten a bit of attention, voicemail poems published originally, and it's in the book. And I love that poem, and people often want to mention that poem. But it's interesting because I think, like, for those who don't know, PrEP is pre-exposure prophylactic. It's a treatment for preventing the spread of HIV. But I think it's interesting because I don't think that's a particularly queer poem. I think maybe it is. It's about gay sex. It's about
Give us some insights because you write, it's there woven in. You almost surprise us in a way in some of the poems with that part of your identity.
oh, thanks. Yeah, you know, in one of the questions you had sent me over the course of this sort of promotion thing, you mentioned asking for prep, which is a poem that's gotten a bit of attention, voicemail poems published originally, and it's in the book. And I love that poem, and people often want to mention that poem. But it's interesting because I think, like, for those who don't know, PrEP is pre-exposure prophylactic. It's a treatment for preventing the spread of HIV. But I think it's interesting because I don't think that's a particularly queer poem. I think maybe it is. It's about gay sex. But I think it's about optimism. I think it's about the optimism of being prepared in ways like PrEP offers us, and what preparation means about optimism, about like, oh, you're imagining a future where the world's not ending. You'd only be prepared if you can imagine a future. And so, but I think that the queerest poems in the book aren't the ones that are like about obvious queer things like HIV prevention, but things, I mean, honestly, just about having a body and being observed. I think a lot of the poems in the book are about that, about having a body and being observed. And I think those are, for me, the queerest poems in the book.
And Suzanne, how do you weave this, weave being a gay woman into your writing and or life?
Well, it's kind of a long answer. So when I started teaching, I was so closeted. I worked in a rural school. It was scary. The KKK was up there. Ugh. And so, you know, over the amount of time that I taught, it was really like watching sort of the arc of justice for gay students, and how it went from, you know, you're going to get your ass kicked if you speak up, to we have a LGBTQ club here in school. And although there was a rough transition, which I was definitely part of, you know, it came to pass that there was a safe place for queer kids. With my writing, the science fiction that I wrote back in the 90s always had lesbian characters. And my agent said to me, I don't know where we're going to sell lesbian science fiction, but he managed to do it. And that was great. And so I try to put lesbians in all my books because I am fighting the patriarchy with every word I write. And my deepest wish is to be banned, to have a banned book.
Yeah. That's it. That's the dream. Yeah.
And we are so happy that you're part of our small press. We really are. And I hopefully you will select and find, you know, writers that we can nurture going forward. Whoever they are, whatever their backgrounds, they are welcome at the Washington Writers Publishing House. The only thing is they have to live in DC, Maryland, or Virginia.
Thank you all so much for that wonderful conversation. I loved how we were able to get so much dialogue across genres, and kind of a reminder that at the end of the day, we're all really writing from the same impulse. Does anyone have anything that they would like to plug? Anything that they're working on? Anthony, what can we look out for from you?
Well, I think foremost, I'd love to plug this sort of reading calendar that we have. Me and Suzanne are doing a whole bunch of reading events together across the DMV for the Inner Loop. We'll also be reading in Frederick this month, in Reston, Virginia next month. We have a whole bunch of readings. You can find, I think, either of our websites, either of our social media, you can find that full calendar. And we'd love to have people come out and meet them in person and read poems and stories to them in person.
And Suzanne, would you like to add anything to plug?
Visit my website, suzannefeldman.net. There's a list of events with links and that Anthony and I will be at. And my other books are there too, plus my various thoughts. So
Thank you. Thank you all so much. And again, we'll have links down below in the description box. Thank you all so much for being here. And thank you, Caroline, for leading the discussion.
thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, the Inner Loop.
Woo! Thanks for joining us in the Author's Corner. For more conversations with DC area authors and to stay updated about the latest from small independent presses, subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Facebook at The Inner Loop DC and on Twitter and Instagram at The Inner Loop Lit.